You think you know what Socrates meant when he said he knew nothing. You don't. Everybody gets it wrong. They hear the phrase, nod along, maybe drop it at a dinner party to sound clever. But the actual mechanics of what that 70-year-old Athenian figured out in the 5th century BCE, that's a different animal entirely. This wasn't humility theater. This wasn't false modesty. This was a precision weapon disguised as surrender, and Athens killed him for it. Here's what happened. Around 469 BCE, a boy is born in the Demi of Alapes, just outside Athens proper. His father, Sophroniskis, cuts stone for a living, maybe sculpts statues. His mother, Phainarete, delivers babies. She's a midwife. The family has money, not aristocratic wealth, but enough that young Socrates inherits property and doesn't starve. He learns to read, write, play music, wrestle. Standard Athenian education for someone of his class. He probably worked stone with his father for years. Some ancient sources claim he carved a famous sculpture of the three Graces that stood at the entrance to the Acropolis. Whether that's true or legend, we know he had a trade. He knew how to make things with his hands. Then war comes, the Peloponnesian War. 431 to 404 BCE. Athens versus Sparta. 27 years of blood. Socrates fights as a hoplite, heavy infantry. He carries 66 pounds of equipment. Bronze helmet, breastplate, greaves, round shield, spear. He marches to Potidaea in 432 BCE at age 37 or 38. This isn't a quick skirmish. It's a 3-year siege. Men die of starvation. The plague of Athens spreads into the camp. Socrates endures. He saves the life of a young officer named Alcibiades during an enemy attack. Alcibiades is wounded, unhorsed, his armor stripped. Socrates stands over him alone, fights off attackers, gets him to safety. Alcibiades later says he was nominated for the prize of preeminent valor, but turned it down so Alcibiades could receive it instead. 5 years later, 424 BCE, the Battle of Delium, first full-scale hoplite battle of the entire war. Bloodiest one. The Athenians fortify a temple, get attacked by a superior Theban force, and everything collapses. Friendly fire incident. Athenians killing their own men in the chaos. Total rout. During the retreat, Socrates walks with General Lacus. Alcibiades, now on horseback, spots them. He later describes Socrates moving through the chaos with absolute calm, eyes scanning, alert but not panicked, walking normally while others sprint in terror. The enemy sees him and leaves him alone. They chase the men who are running, not the one who looks like he'll kill the first person to try. Lacus says afterward that if every man at Delium had fought like Socrates, the defeat would never have happened. 2 years later, 422 BCE, the Battle of Amphipolis. Socrates is nearly 50 now, ancient for a soldier in that era. He fights anyway. 3 major campaigns, 3 defeats for Athens, but Socrates survives them all. He walks away with something most veterans never articulate, a complete understanding of what he doesn't know about death, about courage, about what happens next. If you value documented philosophy and military history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Comment what city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources like Plato's Apology and Symposium, both written within a decade of Socrates' death in 399 BCE, and cross-referenced with Xenophon's Memorabilia and Apology, plus archaeological evidence from Athens. Now back to the information. Somewhere in this period, the exact year isn't recorded, something happens that changes everything. Socrates has a childhood friend named Chaerephon, wild guy, impulsive. One day Chaerephon travels to Delphi, the most sacred oracle site in all of Greece, the Temple of Apollo. Center of the world, the Greeks believed. Chaerephon asks the Pythia, the priestess who channels Apollo's prophecies, a question: is anyone wiser than Socrates? The Pythia answers, no one is wiser. Chaerephon comes back to Athens and tells Socrates. And here's where most people miss the point entirely. Socrates doesn't puff up with pride. He doesn't accept the compliment. He's genuinely confused, almost offended, because Socrates knows something crucial about himself. He has no special expertise. He can't claim mastery over politics. Poetry, military strategy, craftwork, religious rituals, or any of the domains that wise men are supposed to know. He's aware he lacks this knowledge. So how can the god be right? But here's the thing. Socrates believes the oracle can't lie. Apollo is the god of truth. If the god says no one is wiser than Socrates, then it must be true in some way. But it can't be literally true, because Socrates possesses no wisdom. So it must be a riddle, and that's when Socrates starts his life's work. He decides to test the oracle. He'll go find someone clearly wiser than himself, bring that person back to Delphi, metaphorically speaking, and prove the god wrong. Simple plan. Should take maybe a week. Find a politician known for wisdom, have a conversation, confirm the man knows more than Socrates does. Case closed. So he approaches a prominent Athenian statesman. They talk. Socrates asks questions. What is justice? What is the good? What makes a citizen virtuous? And something strange happens. The politician gives confident answers. But when Socrates probes those answers with follow-up questions, simple ones, logical ones, the whole structure collapses. The politician contradicts himself. His definitions fall apart. He thought he knew what justice was, but under examination, he doesn't actually know. He just had opinions he'd never questioned. Socrates walks away from that conversation thinking, well, neither of us knows anything noble and good, but he thinks he knows something when he doesn't. I at least know that I don't know. So in that small way, maybe I am wiser than him. He tries again. Poets this time. Surely poets know something. They write beautiful verses about virtue and courage and the gods. They must have deep understanding. Socrates talks to them, asks them to explain their own work. What does this passage mean? Why did you write it this way? What's the moral insight here? The poets can't explain their own poetry. They wrote it by inspiration, by some divine gift, but they have no rational understanding of what they created. And worse, because they write beautifully, they assume they're wise about everything. Politics, ethics, statecraft. They claim expertise they don't have. Socrates moves to craftsmen next, shipbuilders, sculptors, blacksmiths. And here he finds something genuine. These men actually know their trades. A shipbuilder knows wood, joints, designs that float. A blacksmith knows metal, heat, shaping, real knowledge, real expertise, but the same problem emerges. Because they know one thing well, they assume they know other things equally well. The shipbuilder thinks his carpentry expertise qualifies him to speak on politics. The blacksmith thinks his metallurgy makes him an expert on justice. Their real knowledge in narrow domains blinds them to their ignorance in broader ones. And their real knowledge is shadowed by this overreach. Socrates realizes he's found the answer to Apollo's riddle. The god wasn't saying Socrates possessed positive wisdom, knowledge of important truths about how to live. The god was saying human wisdom is worthless compared to divine wisdom. And among humans, the wisest person is the one who recognizes this worthlessness. Socrates is wisest because he knows he doesn't know. Everyone else thinks they know when they don't. That's the fundamental human error. That gap between perceived knowledge and actual knowledge, that's where all the damage happens. But Socrates doesn't stop after solving the riddle. He decides the god has given him a mission. If Apollo declared him wisest because he alone recognizes his ignorance, then Socrates must be serving the god by helping others recognize their ignorance too. He takes this as a divine command. He'll spend the rest of his life questioning Athenians about the most important things: virtue, justice, courage, piety, and showing them they don't actually know what they claim to know. This is where the Socratic method gets born. Elenchus, the Greeks called it, cross-examination. Refutation. The technique works like this. Someone makes a claim. Courage is standing firm in battle. Piety is doing what the gods command. Justice is giving people what they deserve. Socrates says he doesn't know what these things are, asks the person to teach him. Pure innocence. Feigned ignorance. Socratic irony. He's pretending not to know so he can expose what the other person doesn't know. Then he asks clarifying questions. Simple ones. So if courage is standing firm in battle, what about the tactical retreat? Is that cowardly? What about a doctor who faces a disease? Is that courage? Or a sailor in a storm? The questions multiply. Each answer spawns new questions, and slowly, inevitably, the person contradicts themselves. Their original definition fails to cover all cases, or it conflicts with other things they believe, and the whole framework crumbles. This isn't random destruction. Socrates believed that you can't know what courage is if your definition leads to contradiction. Knowledge has to be internally consistent. If you hold mutually exclusive beliefs about the same concept, you don't actually know that concept. You just think you do. And that false confidence, that's the most dangerous kind of ignorance. Consider what happens in Plato's dialogue, Euthyphro. Socrates meets Euthyphro outside the court. Both men have legal business. Socrates is there because he's been indicted for impiety. Euthyphro is there to prosecute his own father for murder. A worker on the family estate killed a household slave. Euthyphro's father bound the killer, threw him in a ditch, and sent someone to ask the religious authorities what to do. While waiting for an answer, the bound worker died of exposure and neglect. Now Euthyphro, confident in his knowledge of piety, is prosecuting his own father. Socrates sees an opportunity. Here's someone who claims to know what piety is, knows it so well he'll prosecute his own father based on that knowledge. Perfect test case. Teach me what piety is, Socrates asks. I'm about to stand trial for impiety. If you know the definition, share it with me. Euthyphro gives definition after definition. Piety is what the gods love, but the gods disagree with each other, so what one loves another hates, making the same action both pious and impious. Fine, piety is what all the gods love, but is an action pious because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it's pious? That's the famous Euthyphro dilemma, still debated in philosophy classes today. The dialogue ends without resolution. Euthyphro, supposedly an expert on piety, can't define it. He rushes off, claiming urgent business. He won't admit he doesn't know what he thought he knew. Same pattern in Plato's Laches. Two Athenian generals, Laches and Nicias, try to define courage. Laches says courage is standing firm in battle. Socrates points out that sometimes wisdom dictates retreat. So standing firm might be foolish rather than courageous. Laches revises, courage is wise endurance. But what kind of wisdom? The dialogue spirals. Every definition fails. These aren't stupid men. They're combat veterans. They've displayed physical courage many times. But they can't articulate what courage actually is. In Plato's Charmides, the target is temperance or self-control. In the Meno, it's virtue itself. Same result every time. Confident claims dissolve under questioning. And here's the crucial point. Socrates doesn't claim to have better definitions. He's not playing gotcha to show off superior knowledge. He ends these conversations in aporia, genuine puzzlement, intellectual impasse. Nobody knows the answer, including Socrates. But at least now everyone in the conversation recognizes they don't know. The false confidence is stripped away. This is the genius of Socratic ignorance. It's not passive. It's not saying I'm dumb, teach me. It's weaponized humility. By claiming to know nothing, Socrates puts the burden of proof on others. And when they can't meet that burden, their ignorance becomes visible, to themselves and to everyone watching. The method exposes the gap between reputation and reality. A man can be famous for wisdom while possessing none. A poet can write beautiful verses about virtue while understanding nothing about it. A politician can govern a city while not knowing what justice means. But here's what people miss. Socrates wasn't a nihilist. He didn't think knowledge was impossible. He thought most people were approaching it wrong. They accumulated beliefs without testing them. They inherited opinions from tradition without examining whether those opinions made sense. They confused familiarity with understanding. I've heard about justice my whole life, so I must know what it is. Wrong. You've heard words about justice. You've been told things about justice. But do you actually know what justice is? Can you define it in a way that holds up under scrutiny? The phrase, the unexamined life is not worth living, that's from Socrates, trial defense. He's 70 years old, standing before 500 Athenian jurors, charged with impiety and corrupting the youth. The trial happens in 399 BCE. Athens is traumatized. They just lost the Peloponnesian War to Sparta. They endured the brutal rule of the 30 tyrants, an oligarchy imposed by Sparta that killed about 5% of Athens' population. One of those tyrants, Critias, had been Socrates' student, another problematic associate. Alcibiades, the same man Socrates saved at Potidaea, defected to Sparta during the war, gave them military intelligence, helped them beat Athens. These aren't abstract connections. Socrates taught both men. So when Miletus, Anytus, and Lycon bring charges against Socrates, they're channeling citywide rage. The formal charges say he doesn't believe in the gods Athens believes in, that he introduces new divinities, that he corrupts young men. But the subtext screams, his teachings produced traitors. His philosophy made Critias and Alcibiades. He's dangerous. Socrates. Defense is extraordinary. He doesn't grovel. He doesn't apologize. He explains the oracle, his mission, why he questions people. He says the god commanded him to practice philosophy, to examine others, to be a gadfly stinging a sluggish horse. That's Athens, into action. If you kill me, he tells them, you'll harm yourselves more than me. You'll be killing the one person who forces you to think about virtue rather than money and reputation. The jury votes. Roughly 280 find him guilty. 220 vote innocent. Narrow margin. Under Athenian law, the prosecution proposes a penalty, the defense counter-proposes, and the jury chooses between them. Miletus proposes death. Socrates is expected to propose exile or a large fine. Standard procedure. Instead, Socrates suggests his penalty should be free meals at the Prytaneum for life. That's the reward Athens gives Olympic victors. He's saying he deserves honor, not punishment. He's done them a service. The jury is furious. More vote for death than voted guilty initially. 360 for death, 140 against. He's sentenced to drink hemlock. There's a delay. Religious festivals prevent executions. And during that time, Socrates' friends organize an escape. His wealthy friend Crito visits the prison, offers to bribe guards, arranges safe passage out of Athens. Socrates refuses. He says breaking the law, even an unjust law, would contradict everything he taught. The laws of Athens raised him, educated him, gave him citizenship. He can't abandon them now just because the decision went against him. To do so would harm the city more than his death would. On the day of execution, his friends gather in the cell. Plato's dialogue Phaedo describes the scene. Socrates discusses the immortality of the soul with complete calm. When the jailer brings the cup of hemlock, Socrates takes it cheerfully. No anger, no bitterness. He drinks it all, walks around until his legs feel heavy, lies down. The poison works from extremities inward. His feet go numb, then legs, then moving up. His last words, Credo. We owe a rooster to Asclepius. Don't forget to pay the debt. Asclepius is the god of healing. Some scholars think Socrates is saying death is a cure, release of the soul from the body. Others think he's fulfilling a religious obligation to the very end, demonstrating his piety even as he dies for supposed impiety. What killed him wasn't really the official charges. It was the threat he posed to human self-image. People don't want to discover they're ignorant, especially powerful people, especially people whose authority rests on perceived expertise. Socrates spent decades making important Athenians look foolish in front of crowds. Young men loved watching him dismantle their elders. They started imitating his questioning methods. Suddenly, teenagers are asking politicians what justice really means, and the politicians can't answer. That's embarrassing. That's destabilizing. A society that can't defend its foundational concepts starts cracking. But here's the deepest layer of Socratic ignorance, the part almost everyone misses. Socrates knew some things with absolute certainty. In the Apology, he says he knows that injustice and disobedience to one's betters, whether God or man, is evil and dishonorable. He knows this, not suspects, not believes. Knows. He also knows that he should follow the divine mission given by Apollo, even if it kills him. And he knows that doing wrong is worse than suffering wrong. So the phrase, I know that I know nothing, is misleading. It's a paraphrase anyway. Nowhere does Plato record Socrates saying exactly that. What Socrates actually says is more nuanced. He knows he lacks wisdom about the big metaphysical questions, what happens after death, the true nature of the gods, the ultimate structure of reality. He's ignorant about those things and knows he's ignorant, but he has moral certainty about ethical fundamentals. He knows wrongdoing is bad for the soul. He knows virtue is the highest good. He knows the examined life is the only life worth living. The paradox isn't, I know that I know nothing. The real paradox is this. Knowing your ignorance about complex questions allows you to have confidence about basic moral principles. Because when you strip away false certainty, all those inherited opinions, those untested assumptions, those confident claims that evaporate under questioning, you're left with what survives examination. And what survives is bedrock. Socrates couldn't define courage perfectly, but he knew that acting unjustly was never courageous. He couldn't define piety completely, but he knew that disobeying divine commands wasn't pious. The negative knowledge, knowing what something isn't, gives ground for positive ethical action. This connects to something else Socrates talked about, his daemonion, his divine sign, a voice, he called it, that had spoken to him since childhood, not like Zeus thundering commands, more subtle. An inner warning. It only ever told him what not to do, never what to do. If he was about to make a mistake, say something wrong, go somewhere harmful, take a bad action, the voice would stop him. Stay silent when the plan was good. Speak up when it was bad. During his trial, he mentions that the daemonion never opposed him, not when leaving home that morning, not when speaking to the jury, not even when facing death. He interprets this silence as approval. His defense is correct. His death is acceptable. The divine voice agrees. His accusers cited this daemonion as evidence of impiety. He's introducing new gods, they said, but Socrates saw it differently. This wasn't a new deity. It was direct divine communication, guiding his moral choices. The god Apollo declared him wisest. This inner voice kept him from errors. Together, they formed a coherent picture. Socrates was chosen to demonstrate something essential about human wisdom. It begins with recognizing what you don't know. If you value documented philosophy and ancient history like this, subscribe. Comment which city you're hearing this from. This research draws on Plato's complete dialogues: Apology, Euthyphro, Laches, Charmides, Meno, Crito, Phaedo, as well as Xenophon's Memorabilia and Apology. Archaeological work on the Athenian state prison has recovered small cups from the drains, believed to be hemlock vessels used in executions. The physical evidence supports the literary accounts. Now back to the information. Consider what Socrates actually accomplished with his method. He created the framework for Western philosophy. Before him, Greek thinkers focused on cosmology. What is the world made of? How did it begin? What are the elements? The pre-Socratics asked about nature. Socrates turned the mirror inward. What is virtue? How should a person live? What makes an action just? These questions became central to philosophy for the next 2.5 millennia. His student Plato founded the Academy in Athens around 387 BCE, one of the first institutions of higher learning in the Western world. Plato's student Aristotle taught Alexander the Great. The chain of influence runs straight through Western civilization, but none of it happens without Socratic ignorance as the foundation. Plato builds his theory of forms partially in response to Socrates' definitional problems. If Socrates can't find a satisfactory definition of justice among particular examples, maybe justice itself exists as a perfect eternal form, and earthly justice is just imperfect reflection. That's Plato taking Socratic questions and constructing metaphysical scaffolding around them. Aristotle develops logic partly to formalize Socratic reasoning. The syllogism, if all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, then Socrates is mortal. That kind of rigorous deductive structure emerges from trying to make Socratic questioning more systematic. Later, philosophers keep returning to Socratic ignorance. Descartes, in the 1600s, starts his meditations by doubting everything he thinks he knows, methodological skepticism modeled on Socratic doubt. How do I know my senses aren't deceiving me? How do I know I'm not dreaming? Strip away uncertain beliefs until you reach bedrock certainty. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Same movement Socrates made. Question everything until you find what survives questioning. Even modern scientific method carries Socratic DNA. You don't start with confident claims. You start with hypotheses, tentative guesses to be tested. You try to falsify your ideas, not confirm them. You recognize that current knowledge might be wrong. Science advances when researchers realize they don't know something and investigate rather than assume. But the personal dimension matters too. What did Socratic ignorance do for Socrates himself? It made him free. When you stop pretending to know things you don't know, you lose the burden of defending indefensible positions. You don't have to save face. You don't have to construct elaborate rationalizations for beliefs that don't hold up. You can just say, I don't know. And that opens space for actual learning. Think about conversations you've had where someone refuses to admit they're wrong. They dig in. They deflect. They change the subject. They attack the questioner. Anything to avoid saying those 3 words, I was wrong. Socrates cut through all that. By starting from ignorance, by genuinely not claiming expertise, he had nothing to protect. His ego wasn't invested in being right because he wasn't claiming to be right about anything specific. This approach made him terrifying to people who built their identity on being experts. If you're a politician whose entire career rests on knowing how to govern, and some weird-looking guy with a snub nose asks you what justice is, and you can't answer coherently, your whole self-concept is threatened. You're exposed. The emperor has no clothes. And you know who sees you naked. Everyone watching the conversation. Young men, other citizens. Your constituents. Devastating. That's why they killed him. Not because he taught atheism. He clearly believed in the gods. Just in his own way. Not because he corrupted youth. His students became some of Athens' finest minds. They killed him because he made visible the gap between reputation and reality, between claimed knowledge and actual knowledge, between confident authority and genuine wisdom. The 70-year-old soldier who'd saved lives in battle, who refused to participate in unjust arrests during the tyranny Aeos, who'd spent 40 years in service to the gods' mission. They put him to death for asking questions, for showing people they didn't know what they thought they knew. His final hours are instructive. Surrounded by weeping friends, his wife Xanthippe there, apparently difficult relationship. Ancient sources describe her as difficult, though that might just be misogyny, who knows. His 3 sons, Lamprocles, Sophroniscus, Menexenus, none of whom became philosophers. Socrates spent his life questioning other people's sons instead of raising his own. Make of that what you will. But in those last hours, he's not bitter. He's not scared. He's still doing philosophy, still examining ideas, still probing concepts, the soul's immortality. What happens after death? Whether his daemonians stayed silent because death isn't actually evil. There's a moment Plato describes where someone brings up an inconsistency in something Socrates said earlier, and Socrates says, yes, you're right. Let me reconsider. Hours before drinking poison, He's still willing to revise his views based on better arguments. That's what knowing your ignorance looks like in practice. Not just abstract humility, actual willingness to change your mind when logic demands it. The hemlock takes effect. His body goes cold from the feet up. He covers his face. Near the end, he uncovers it to speak those last words about owing Asclepius a rooster. Even dying, he's thinking about religious obligations, about debts unpaid, about doing things correctly. Then he covers his face again and dies. 399 BCE. Athens kills its greatest teacher. Within a decade, Plato writes the Apology, Crito, Phaedo, Euthyphro, the dialogues covering Socrates, trial and death. The Apology isn't an apology in our sense. It's a defense speech. Plato was present at the trial. He preserves, with whatever artistic license, what Socrates said, and through those preserved words, Socratic ignorance becomes immortal. Here's the final irony. The man who claimed to know nothing became the most influential thinker in Western history precisely because of that claim. By insisting on his ignorance, he forced everyone else to examine theirs. By refusing to teach positive doctrines, he taught the most important thing, the value of knowing what you don't know. By accepting death rather than abandoning his questioning, he showed that intellectual honesty matters more than physical survival. 25 centuries later, we're still grappling with what he uncovered. We still build institutions of learning on the model his student Plato established. We still use variations of his questioning method in law schools, philosophy classes, therapy sessions. We still struggle with the gap between confidence and competence, between claiming expertise and possessing it, and we still, mostly, fail to learn the central lesson. Most people would rather defend false beliefs than admit ignorance, would rather attack questioners than examine themselves, would rather kill the messenger than hear the message. Socrates figured something out that humans aren't built to accept easily. Your ignorance is more useful than your false knowledge. What you don't know, recognized and acknowledged, is the beginning of wisdom. What you think you know, unexamined and untested, is the beginning of disaster. The stonecutter's son, who became a soldier, who became a philosopher, who became a martyr, understood one thing perfectly. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who's certain they have all the answers. And the wisest person might be the one with the courage to say, I don't know, and mean it. They buried him somewhere in Athens. The exact location is lost. No grand tomb, no monument that survived. Just ideas, just questions. Just that relentless insistence on intellectual honesty that cost him everything and gave us the foundation of Western thought. 2,400 years ago, the prison in the Athenian agora, small cups in the drains, and an old man saying, the unexamined life is not worth living. Then proving it by dying rather than stop examining. But let's go deeper into the mechanics of what he actually discovered, because most people stop at the surface. Oh, Socrates was humble. Socrates admitted he didn't know things. How nice. That's not it. That's not even close. The discovery was far more radical. Think about knowledge acquisition. How do you learn something? Standard model. You don't know X, someone teaches you X, now you know X. Simple transfer. Empty vessel gets filled. But Socrates discovered something that breaks this model. Most people aren't empty vessels. They're already full of wrong things, false beliefs, bad definitions, inherited assumptions, cultural prejudices, convenient lies they tell themselves. Before you can learn what justice is, you have to unlearn your false definition of justice. Before you can understand courage, you have to strip away the half-baked version you've been carrying. The emptying has to come before the filling, and nobody wants to be emptied. It feels like loss. It feels like dying. That's what Socrates meant when he compared himself to a midwife. Like his mother, Phaenorette, she helped women give birth to babies. He helped men give birth to ideas. But childbirth is painful. Intellectual childbirth even more so. Because you're not just creating something new, you're watching old certainties die. Every definition that fails under questioning is a small death. Every confident claim that dissolves is a piece of identity crumbling. No wonder they killed him. He wasn't just asking annoying questions. He was systematically destroying the psychological foundations people had built their lives on. This politician defined himself as wise about governance. Socrates shows he doesn't know what justice means. That poet defined himself as someone who understands the human condition. Socrates shows he can't explain his own verses. The craftsman took pride in his expertise. Socrates shows that expertise doesn't transfer to everything else. The questioning was an abstract philosophical exercise. It was existential warfare. Every conversation potentially annihilated someone's self-concept. And Socrates did this publicly, with audiences of young men laughing at the spectacle. Athens wasn't killing a philosopher. They were eliminating a threat to social stability. A man who makes leaders look like fools undermines the entire system. But here's what makes Socratic ignorance so profound. It wasn't skepticism. Socrates wasn't saying knowledge is impossible, so why bother? That's a different philosophical position entirely. Socrates believed passionately that knowledge mattered, that truth existed, that finding it was the most important human activity. He just believed most people were doing it wrong. The method reveals this. Every failed definition in those dialogues teaches something. When Laches says courage is standing firm and Socrates shows that fails, we learn something real about courage. It's not simply about physical position. When Euthyphro says piety is what the gods love and Socrates shows that's circular, we learn something real about piety. It needs grounding beyond divine preference. The negative results accumulate into positive knowledge. You might not know what virtue is, but you know what it isn't. That's not nothing. That's foundational. Consider the intellectual discipline this requires. You have to simultaneously believe knowledge is possible while accepting you don't have it yet. You have to care enough about truth to destroy comfortable falsehoods. You have to value understanding over certainty. Most humans can't do this. We're wired to resolve cognitive dissonance as quickly as possible, usually by ignoring evidence that threatens our beliefs. Socrates embraced the dissonance. He lived in it. That's what the examined life means: constant discomfort, perpetual questioning, never settling into false security. And it wasn't just intellectual. Look at how Socrates lived. Plato describes him as famously ugly: snub-nosed, bulging eyes, pot belly, not the Athenian ideal of masculine beauty. But Socrates didn't care. He wore the same cloak year-round. He walked barefoot. He ate simply. He took no payment for his conversations. He lived in relative poverty despite being offered wealth by admirers. Material things didn't matter because they weren't the examined life's concern. What's justice? What's virtue? What's the good life? Those questions mattered. New sandals didn't. This consistency between thought and action is crucial. Lots of people claim intellectual humility while defending their egos ferociously. Socrates embodied his philosophy. He really did treat himself as ignorant. He really did prioritize truth over comfort. He really did value wisdom over wealth. When he said the unexamined life isn't worth living, he meant it literally. He chose death rather than stop examining. That's not metaphor. That's proof of concept. The trial itself demonstrates this. Socrates had multiple opportunities to save himself. He could have proposed exile as his penalty, standard practice. Leave Athens, go live somewhere else, keep teaching. He refuses. That would mean admitting wrongdoing he didn't commit. His daemonian never opposed his actions. So the god approved. He can't compromise on that. He could have proposed a large fine. His wealthy friends, Plato, Crito, Apollodorus, offered to pay 30 minae, substantial money. Socrates initially resists even this because it implies guilt. Eventually, he accepts their guarantee of the fine, but by then he's already antagonized the jury by suggesting he deserves free meals as reward. Too late. The jury's insulted. He could have made a different defense entirely. Appeal to emotion. Bring his children before the court. Let them cry. Standard tactic in Athenian trials. Socrates explicitly refuses. He says other men do this, but it's shameful. The court should judge based on truth and justice, not sympathy for his kids. This matters. At 70, facing death, with 3 sons, including a young one, he won't use them as props, because that would violate the principle of honest inquiry. You examine ideas based on merit, not feelings. Even after condemnation, escape remained possible. His friend Crito arranged everything. Bribed guards. Safe route out of Athens. Money for living abroad. Socrates could leave, keep teaching, keep questioning, keep serving Apollo's mission. But he refuses. Why? Because escape would mean breaking laws. And if you break laws when they go against you, you undermine the entire system that made your life possible. Athens raised him, educated him, gave him standing to question others. He can't reject Athens' laws now just because the decision hurts him. This is the examined life in extremis. Socrates questions everything except his core ethical commitments. And those commitments follow divine command. Never act unjustly, maintain intellectual honesty, respect legitimate authority. Those have been tested by decades of Elenchus. They survived examination. They're bedrock. So he can die for them without hesitation. Compare this to how most people handle being wrong. Denial, deflection, anger, blame, anything but acknowledgement. Now imagine being so committed to truth that you'll die rather than compromise it. That's what Socratic ignorance produces. Not weakness, steel, not uncertainty. Absolute conviction about what survives questioning. The students Socrates left behind carried this forward in different directions. Plato went metaphysical. If particular definitions fail, maybe universal forms exist independently. Antisthenes went cynical, reject all conventions. live according to nature. Aristippus went hedonistic. Pleasure is the good. Pursue it intelligently. Different conclusions from the same starting point. Examine everything, accept only what survives scrutiny. But they all kept the core Socratic commitment. Intellectual honesty over comfortable lies. Examination over assumption. Knowledge of ignorance over false certainty. That's Socrates' actual legacy, not specific doctrines, not positive teachings. A method, a stance, a refusal to accept unexamined beliefs, no matter how ancient, popular, or convenient they are. And it works. That's the crazy part. Socratic questioning actually produces knowledge, not the way people expect, answers delivered on a platter, but through the harder process of testing beliefs, finding flaws, refining understanding, getting closer to truth iteratively. Science works this way. Good philosophy works this way. Effective therapy works this way. You question assumptions, reveal contradictions, reconstruct on firmer ground. The alternative is what Socrates saw everywhere in Athens. Politicians certain about justice while being unjust. Poets certain about wisdom while speaking nonsense. Craftsmen certain about everything because they know one thing. False confidence creating real damage. Cities run by people who can't define their governing principles. Wars started by leaders who can't articulate what they're fighting for. Young people taught by elders who've never examined what they're teaching. That's the darkness Socratic ignorance illuminates. We build civilizations on untested foundations. We make decisions affecting millions based on assumptions nobody's questioned. We feel certain about ethics we can't define, politics we can't justify, beliefs we can't defend. And when someone finally asks why we think what we think, we either can't answer or we get angry, usually both. Socrates offered the cure. Question everything. Recognize your ignorance. Examine your assumptions. Test your beliefs. Accept only what survives scrutiny. It sounds simple. It costs everything, because it means admitting that most of what you think you know, you don't actually know. That your confident opinions might be wrong. That your expertise in one domain doesn't make you wise about others. That you've spent years defending beliefs you've never tested. People don't want to hear this. They didn't in Athens. They don't now. The man who points out the emperor has no clothes isn't a hero. He's a nuisance. The philosopher who shows the politician doesn't understand justice isn't a savior. He's a threat. The teacher who makes students question their assumptions isn't beloved. He's killed, but the method works. 2.5 millennia of Western thought prove it. Every time someone questions a long-held belief and finds it false, that's Socratic. Every time a scientist tests a hypothesis rather than assumes it's true, that's Socratic. Every time a therapist helps a patient examine their thought patterns rather than accepting them uncritically, that's Socratic. The method survived because it produces results, not comfortable results, true results. The price was one life. The gain was everything that followed. Socrates drank hemlock in 399 BCE. Philosophy was born. 25 centuries later, we're still his students. Every honest question is his legacy. Every admitted ignorance is his monument. Every examined life is his victory. The man who knew he knew nothing gave us more knowledge than all the confident experts combined. That's the genius most people miss. That's why the title is right. The way Socrates understood ignorance was much more genius than you imagine, because he understood that wisdom isn't what you know, it's knowing what you don't know, and having the courage to admit it out loud.